Welcome to the Orthogonal Bet, where we explore the weird and wonderful ideas that shape our world. It's a cabinet of curiosities for the ears and the mind. I'm your host, Samuel Arbesman, complexity scientist, author, and scientist in residence at Lux Capital. In this episode, I had the pleasure to speak with Florian Yin. Florian is a researcher who studies the nature of societal collapse and writes the blog Existential Crunch. Existential Crunch examines and summarizes the scientific work in this space and acts as a living literature review for the world of societal collapse. I had a chance to speak with Florian about the origins of existential crunch, the radically interdisciplinary nature of the study of societal collapse, and how this field cuts across many domains. We talked about the statistical study of history to understand the rise and fall of civilizations, how to think about catastrophic risk and existential risk in the context of societal collapse, the nature of societal resilience, and much more. We even discussed what societal collapse might feel like if you are in the midst of it, and whether we are in the middle of one right now. This was a fascinating conversation, and I had a great time speaking with Florian. Let's begin. Florian, great to be chatting with you, and welcome to the Orthogonal Bet.
Thanks. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this is exciting. I'm really interested in maybe just beginning with the project Existential Crunch. I'd love maybe if you can just talk about what is Existential Crunch, and then how did you begin this? Like, how did these interests begin? How did you begin this process?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Existential Crunch is basically a blog where I try to summarize the research around societal collapse, because I've gotten the impression that people like to know what's in papers, but nobody likes to read papers. And so I thought I'd just offer the service. I read the papers, I summarize them, and you can read my blog to get an overview. This is generally called a living literature review. And the idea is that when I come across new papers, I also update the old posts so people can be reasonably sure when they get to my blog that the things are up to date. This wasn't originally my idea, because the way it started was there's Matt Clancy. He's writing also a living literature review about science and innovation. It's called New Things Under the Sun. And on every post at the bottom, he's just hey, if you're interested in chatting about this, just let me know. And after he had posted an especially interesting article, I was hey, I want to chat with this guy. And so I emailed him. We got in a conversation and talked about the whole blog thing. And as I was also interested in starting a blog at that time, he basically offered me hey, it seems your writing is going in the right direction, and would you be interested to doing something like this as well? And so I got a grant from Open Philanthropy, which is paying for some of my time. And now I've been doing this for around 2.5 years.
That's amazing. And just out of curiosity, what is the audience at this point, in terms of who are the readers? Is it academics who also don't want to have to read all the papers and kind of enjoy and appreciate the fact that you're summarizing these things? Is it a more general audience? Who do you feel that you're writing for? Who has found the blog?
I think the idea is to basically make it something for everyone who is interested in societal collapse, in general. But from how the audience engages with it, I've gotten the impression that I've got kind of several pools of people I tapped into. So I think there's a strong part from the EA rationality community. There are definitely some people there, but also a lot of scientists in general, also some policymakers from EU and UN, but also a bunch of people who are interested in collapse.
And so, I guess related to that, how did you get interested in collapse? It's kind of and on the one hand, it sounds like a weird thing to get interested in. Obviously, I think everyone should probably have at least some degree of interest in maybe averting societal collapse. But what is the origins of your own interest in this topic?
I think I was interested in history related things for quite a while. Originally, I thought about even studying history, but ultimately decided for environmental science. And after my PhD, I got more into the whole global catastrophic risk space, understanding how different catastrophes can play out with humanity, and especially things like nuclear war, and things like these. And going from you have a very big catastrophe to society might collapse, it is not a very far distance. And so it kind of came naturally that when you get interested in the things that are a danger to society, you also get interested in what might happen to societies if these dangers occur.
So, you came at it from, I guess, a more environmental and scientific route. Did you read a lot of like post-apocalyptic stories or things like that when you were younger that kind of also informed this? Like, I mean, has this been a long-standing interest, or was it more from the research angle?
I think the thing is that like I get very easily interested in things. So if you tell me about anything, I'm probably curious.
You are preaching to the choir, so don't worry at all.
But I think like this topic in particular is interesting to me because it touches on so many things. Because like if you want to understand like how collapse happens and why collapse happens and what happens after it occurred, how we might prevent it, you have to touch on totally many topics. Like if you look at the blogs, it covers like economics, environmental science, history, all kinds of things. So I think I'm interested in it because I think just like it's an important topic to understand, but also because it gives me the excuse to look into all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah, and I guess the other people who are playing in this space, like, do they all are they specialized in a specific topic? Is it the kind of thing where they also feel able to kind of explore all these different things, from like economics to environment to thinking about societal structures and political ramifications? Because I am also very drawn to domains that feel very like almost like all encompassing. Like there are these things that can touch on lots of different areas. How do people kind of in this field balance specialization and expertise versus being broad without being a dilettante?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on like what different aspects of the topic we look at, because there's definitely like a very big history community around these things. Like, for example, like the Joseph Tainter with his complexity theories, like Peter Turchin with structural demographic theory. And they are basically like sampling into the past to understand the present. But if we look more on the global catastrophic risk side of things, like what can actually like easily cause a collapse, there I've gotten the impression that the people are from very different disciplines and also often like very interdisciplinary in general, because it's just you can't really easily grapple with these topics if you stay like in one small domain, because it just touches on kind of everything else. And so you have to get curious about all the other stuff.
No, I love that. I wonder though, is there a situation or a risk of like reinventing some of these ideas where, because people are coming from so many different fields, they're not aware of what is being done in these other subfields, and as a result, they're trotting upon the same things, or they're not accounting for well understood features of other fields? Like, how do you think about like the upsides and downsides of this radically interdisciplinary kind of approach?
Yeah, the problem that you are trying to reinvent the wheel, that can definitely happen. But I feel like many of the people who are into this have been at it for a while now. And so hopefully they are more aware of what's happening somewhere else. But this is like also one of the reasons that I'm writing the blog, because I try to bring these different strands together. For example, because like especially like when the global catastrophic risk community doesn't look that much into history. It's more like focused on present things, often like very engineering. And like bringing these two together, I think like, for example, is very important. So they cover each other's blind spots. But also one of my ideas, and also like, I think from many other people in the field, just like talk to lots of people, and then hopefully somebody tells you if you're wrong or if you're reinventing the wheel.
Right. And and I feel like, right, to a certain degree, your project is basically doing this kind of surface of like helping people cut across different domains. Maybe, I mean, how do you think about, I mean, we talked about history, and I want to talk about that a little bit more, but how do you think about the history of this field itself, like, which, and it sounds like it's kind of coming from multiple different angles. Like where would you mark the early moments of this? Is it like, I don't know, a book like The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, or like something else entirely? Like where would you mark kind of the beginning of this as a field, or various different fields, and like how has this field or this space kind of developed over time?
Yeah, I think like collapse is something like that people are generally like interested in, like across like a very long period of time, because you see that there have been other civilizations before. So you want to know, okay, why aren't they there anymore? But I think like the decline and fall of the Roman Empire is usually seen as like the first attempt to do this somewhat systematically. And the next bigger things that are usually mentioned is the whole limits of growth debate, because they kind of try to transfer this idea, okay, civilizations can collapse, and hey, it might even be ours. And the other thing is like the ideas from Jared Diamond also did a lot to like popularize the field, and Joseph Tainter as well with his whole idea of like diminishing returns of complexity. And I think like these three, like limits of growth, Tainter and Diamond, they feel to me like the core of the present day collapse research field.
Okay. And I guess in those three, they kind of they focus on very different aspects of the world and society, but they're very I wouldn't say like mathematical, but maybe like there's a certain kind of mathematical sense of like in terms of like understanding the statistics and the features broadly of society. I guess in contrast to like the great man theory of history, where it's like, okay, like how do we think about like the development of society? It's like a series of like important people. And for my mind, it almost feels like some of the work, I mean, not work, I guess, some of the ideas described in like the Foundation trilogy of like Psychohistory of Harry Seldon. This is from like Asimov's Foundation trilogy, which actually, by the way, I think has impacted a lot of people who have done like computational social science.
Certainly.
Is that the major thrust of a lot of this work of like trying to understand statistical regularities of societies so that we can kind of try to gain a certain amount of predictability on like rise and fall of societies and civilizations? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a very important pathway for the field, because the tricky thing is like history, you usually don't have that much information. It's never complete. Like a lot of past theories of collapse, they just try to have a very narrow sample. They basically cherry pick like, okay, I think these civilizations describe all civilizations, and so I'm just going to generalize from them to everything else. Like the decline of the fall of the Roman Empire is also basically this, that it tries to package like, okay, the Romans got too decadent and so they collapsed. And now we also have to avoid to become too decadent because otherwise we will also collapse. But it's just like one guy writing about like one civilization and doing his like own moral twist to it. And so it's like, I'm not sure if I would trust this too far. This is also the reason why I especially like the work of people like Peter Turchin and Dan Hoyer, who've been working like on the C-sharp database for quite some time now. And it definitely like has its flaws if you try to quantify these things, because like how you're going to code it, which things you're looking at. But having this approach, like, okay, we don't want to cherry pick, so we try to just include every civilization as much as possible. And while this still will introduce biases, which are hard to correct for, it's basically the best thing we got. And if you don't trust these things, why would you trust anything else?
Are there people though, I mean, right, because I find, right, Turchin's work very interesting, and like these massive data sets and like trying to kind of find these regularities really, really appealing. On the other hand, though, I imagine there are a number of people in maybe like the X-risk community where not only are they figuring out like the base rates and things, there's also a certain assumption that maybe this current moment is different. Like we are subject to different sorts of risk. Is that a dichotomy, or are there kind of like two schools within this community where like, there are some people where it's really important to understand these statistical and historical regularities to really kind of abstract away the details and find out why things rose and fell, versus other people saying, yeah, that's interesting, but there's only so much we can learn because the current moment is so wildly different?
Yeah, that's definitely like an argument I've heard often before. And there might be something to it. Like it's always like quite difficult to tell. Because, and also like if you look at the past, pretty much everyone always thinks they're like on the super special moment of history and the world's about to collapse. But it turns out like we are still here. And like the next time might be different, but it also might be just like another thing where we didn't really get all the information we needed. This is something like the Seychardt group around Peter Turchin, for example, would like to do, because their main data sets, it ends around like beginning of the 20th century. And you have like many arguments that also say like, okay, you can't look at these very past things and compare them to today because we had the Industrial Revolution and there was like such a massive break that it's completely different now and we can't compare it. And right now, I would say we can't really know, because there isn't like one data set that covers it all. And there are people like working on that to make this gap, like that you have something like Seychardt, but you have it until now, basically. And if we have something like that, well, then you can just look, is there some break somewhere where things just like completely changed around and everything's different now? And there might be, but from my impression of the things that I've read over the course of writing this blog, I think like humans just work kind of the same throughout history. And like obviously things change, technology change, the climate changes, everything changes. But there's a rhyme to it. And I would be really surprised if that rhyme would be gone for the future.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to have almost like a bias, like until really proven otherwise, to kind of assume, yeah, that maybe we are pretty similar to the way we've been for millennia. I guess so taking a step backwards, and we've used a number of different terms like societal collapse, existential risk, catastrophic risk. I imagine there's other ones as well. How would you define and distinguish all these different terms?
Yeah, with societal collapse, it's often quite tricky because there's like a very big debate also in the field. Can you even call it collapse? Is it maybe
really?
a transition? But like generally I like definitions that go in the direction that you have like a quick loss of complexity. And complexity is just everything that makes your society your society. Like, for example, your writing systems, how complex your hierarchy is, how big your trade networks are. And all this adds up to like the overall societal complexity that you have. And if this measure of societal complexity suddenly drops by a wide margin, then probably something very big has happened. That this is roughly like the definition of societal collapse I would subscribe most to. And when it comes to global catastrophic risk, like they are a bit more cleanly defined usually. And for global catastrophic risks, the idea is like all kinds of events that could cause like a significant proportion of humanity to be harmed or killed. So sometimes people attach numbers to that, but obviously this is like anyone's guess what the exact number would be. But often you hear something like 10% or so of the population globally killed. And for existential risks, the idea is that you have an event that leads to the total extinction of humanity, or there's also other definition that talk about like the loss of humanity's potential. And what is meant here is something, if you, for example, you develop a very sophisticated surveillance state where everybody is totally suppressed, but it's so good in the surveillance that nobody can ever again break out of it. And this would also be like a loss of potential because for all eternity, everybody just would have a bad time.
Interesting. Okay. And are there any other situations where, I mean, in terms of population loss, like, is it one of these things? And an existential risk, obviously, if you lose 100% of humanity, that's existential. Is there a sense that if some fraction of humanity survives, but like below which that fraction, it's like not enough to like restart anything? And is there something there? Because people have like talked about, like, as populations get smaller, maybe like certain, like historically, like certain populations have actually lost certain technological ideas. And so maybe like below that, there's not the ability to kind of like restart civilization and society. Is there, like, does it need to be, aside from like the surveillance state example, and is there one where it's like, if there's like 3 people left, that would be enough to ruin humanity's potential? Or is that still an open question for some of these people?
It's definitely like a tricky question to answer because we have the problem, we only have like one humanity to do our research on, and so it's just like very small sample. But from the things I've seen, you probably can go very low population wise before you can say, okay, like this is done, we can't survive from this anymore.
Okay.
The lowest level is probably something, I don't know, a few thousand to 10,000 individuals, that just like the genetic pool is getting too small.
Sure. Yeah.
This might be the absolute lowest level. But the other discussion that is often had about this is the question, can you get back to the same level of technology, or are you stuck in something like medieval times forever? Because the tricky thing is like, there's a very interesting paper by Dan Hoyer and a colleague of his, but they looked at how the complexity of societies develops over time. And what they found is very fascinating. You can kind of all follow very similar slope, that they need around 2,500 years to get to like low complexity, so something like hunter-gatherers, to like roughly medieval society complexity. And this 2,500 years ramp up is very consistent across like different regions, different cultures. So it kind of seems that this is relatively easy to get to if you have 2,500 years.
Sure.
But the switch from going to this roughly medieval level to global industrialized civilization, this we arguably only did once. And there are many debates like, why did we manage this if we weren't able to do it before? Even we had populations who had kind of enough complexity theoretically. There are many ideas out there. There are some arguments like you have the Black Death that increased wages. There are arguments that fossil fuels were just like a boost to our energy available that we had, and so we could do it using this. And now it might be difficult because there's less fossil fuels lying around because we sucked up all the
Or we use them all,
yeah. There's still lots of coal, but if you want to have like easily accessible oil wells, you would probably going to have a hard time.
Like all like the low-hanging fruit has been picked. Or maybe the coal is still available, but certain things you can't reuse them if we've used them all.
Yeah. And I think like this is probably like the most tricky part. Like, can we do this transition to a kind of civilization we have now? And I think like the jury is still out and will likely be for quite some time.
Yeah, related to that though, given that that has only happened, I guess, arguably once in human civilization, is there a sense that is, especially the people who have like, been looking at history and like the growing of technological complexity and civilizational complexity, is there a sense, like, is there a debate around whether or not that's inevitable versus entirely contingent on like certain like aspects of luck and things like that? Like you mentioned, like if there had not been a Black Death, then maybe there had not been that transition. Like, how do people think about the inevitability versus contingency of our current technological civilization?
Yeah, I think like to get to the level of our current civilization, this doesn't seem to be like something that has to happen, because we had so many civilizations which had like a similar complexity to medieval Europe, but they did like make the switch, even though they theoretically like could have. So there must be something there that makes it difficult. But the ramp up before that, it seems kind of like a built-in things you just do as a society, getting more complex until a certain level. But it's tricky. Like, definitely need like more research in that area to really understand the nuances.
Yeah, I mean, has anyone talked about this or written about it in the context of like Fermi's paradox of like where are all the intelligent alien civilizations? And maybe the answer is it's actually a lot harder to get to like a high level technological civilization than we might have realized.
Yeah, maybe. But like with Fermi and paradox solutions, you always run into the problems that they have to be really, 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 really hard.
Yes.
Because
Right.
there are so many planets out there.
Right. There are a lot of stars. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's right. There's enough star systems that right,
And
even
like
if it's hard, right? Yeah, you're gonna get it.
Yeah, like the chance that we are like the one planet where everything was just right to go from medieval to global industrial. It might be, but chance seems low.
Right. It's a much better bet to assume that we are entirely mediocre.
Yeah.
On a number of different dimensions. Going back to talking about societal collapse versus these like catastrophic risks. I mean, what are there risks that can cause societal collapse without the catastrophic risk of like population loss? Like what? How do you think about the triggers for these different kinds of things? Like I assume, like presumably, if there is a large disease that kills 10% or more of a population, that would both lead to a societal collapse and some sort of, and it's also a catastrophic risk. But are there things that could be like lead to collapse but are not actually going to lead to massive population loss? Like how do you think about the different triggers?
Yeah, I think like the triggers and the society you have are always kind of connected. A hazard that doesn't have like a society to have like isn't really a hazard, for example. And I generally see it like this, that you have two separate processes happening at once. And the one side, you have the resilience of your society, and this can rise and this can fall. And this depends on all kinds of things, like, for example, how good you are in distributing resources in your society, how good deliberation happens. But often societies have like some tendency to get lower resilience at some point in their life. But the second thing that happens is that you have outside pressure on your society. And this outside pressure is kind of random, both like in how often it happens and how big the magnitude is. But you can imagine things like a volcano erupting near you, or a pandemic, or your neighbor decides that they want to invade you. And then this random event tests how good your societal resilience is. And if the pressure is bigger than your societal resilience, well, then you have a collapse. And then this means like, even if your society is like very unresilient and not well organized, if it just gets lucky and doesn't get hit by something because there was just like a long pause, you can have like a long, stable time with a very shitty organized society. But on the other hand, you can get unlucky and a great society, it's super resilient, but then a super volcano erupts near you and you're just done.
What are the ways of making a more resilient society? I imagine that's a very open question, but like, how do you think about societal resilience?
About societal resilience, I think like lots and lots of things factor into this, obviously. But from my reading of the literature, two things that tend to come up again and again and again is that both like low wealth inequality and more democratic processes in tendency are better for the resilience of your society. For example, there's like a very interesting study by Peter Peregrine where he looked at how different societies fared better with the little ice age. And they found like the more like your deliberative your society is, the better it survived. So, for example, it had less population loss. And interestingly, we can see similar things happening today, that democratic societies, they tend to be better at like disaster preparedness and mitigation. They tend to be more forward looking. So for example, countries like the UK or the US often write things like national risk registers that are very extensive and open for debate, which you don't really see like for more autocratic states. They might have them, but they might be hidden. And if they're hidden, like you can't really discuss them. And so they are very likely to be more crappy because nobody checks. And the other thing about the inequality is, I think high inequality just has something inherently corrosive for your society. There's like, here I lean a lot like on the structural demographic ideas from Peter Turchin, for example, because like he describes it like that you have, if you have a high inequality in your society, you have like basically three main things that happen. Your state gets less money, because the rich tend to not pay that much taxes in comparison to what they overall have. So your state can do less. Your population gets immiserated, so they get more rebellious because their life is just bad. And also you have like elite overproduction because like too many resources are concentrated in the top of your society, and then they start to infighting, and this also decreases your stability. And if you manage to get this inequality level down, or not even let it get high, then you don't have all these corrosive effects on your society, which likely makes it more resilient for the long term.
Yeah. So when you think about like risks to a society and collapse, I guess, how do you divide up your efforts or your concerns? Is it more on nuclear risk and pandemic preparedness, or is it also on reducing inequality and making sure democratic norms are obeyed? Like, or is it kind of a combination? Like, how do you think about your concerns, and also how should a society think about these things?
I think like in both cases is you just have to consider both, because like as I described like earlier with like the random shocks and the resilience of your society, and you have to kind of keep both in check, or try to keep both in check. And so I think like the main thing that I'm like concerned on is like on the catastrophic risk side is more nuclear war, because we could just do it like now. Like maybe there's a nuclear war started like 10 minutes ago and we're about to find out soon. And it would be like really destructive, like both like locally, but also globally. And so it's very unlikely that the current societies would have a good time like handling this kind of extreme hazard. But on the other side, like I'm worried a lot about especially like democratic erosion in many societies we have today. Like you had a peak of democracies like, I don't know, like 10, 20 years ago. And since then we have this slow backsliding. And this is like really concerning to me, because like, first of all, like I just like to live in a democracy. I think it's a good form to govern. But on the other hand, like it seems to also make this society like more at risk. And so when I talked about these things, and also in my own research, I try to connect these things, but like in my day-to-day work, I usually do more research around the global catastrophic risk and more reading and communication around the societal collapse. But this is more due to the way that I got to these topics and less to the way that I think like everybody should be doing it.
There are many different ways, I guess, collapse can happen or can like what it can feel like. I mean, some of them can, I imagine, can feel very, very rapid, but especially historically, some of these collapses were fairly slow. Like, how do you
Yeah.
think about what collapse would feel like for people in such a societal collapse?
Yeah, I think like it very much depends on the cause of the collapse and also like who you are in that society. Because if you have something like a nuclear war that causes the collapse of your civilization, that would just be really bad for everyone involved. You can imagine everything is destroyed. The sun doesn't really shine anymore for a few years. There's not enough food for everyone around. In the Northern Hemisphere, you probably don't even have drinking water for most people. And this would be just like pure apocalypse and nothing else. But when you have these slower things, and especially like if you are someone who is not very tapped into societal systems, it might not change that much day to day. Like, for example, if you talk about the end of the Roman Empire, if you were like a rich politician in Rome, it probably was really bad because like everything around you crumbled, your institutions were gone, your food was gone, barbarians at the gates. It really bad. But if you are like a farmer at the Balkans and you just have everything you need for your own life, you prepare on your own farm, doesn't really like matter to you if Rome has collapsed, like less taxes, nice. And so even these chronic things might feel very differently. And also like a lot of one who you are and where you are.
And given that, is there a case to be made that we are actually living in the midst of a collapse right now and don't even realize it? Like, does anyone say that kind of thing and try to make that sort of argument?
Yeah, there certainly are. And I think it's also like, this is definitely an argument you could make given on the data that we have available. Because let's, for example, think about climate change, which obviously is bad. And especially like the last 5 years, humanity mostly has given up like caring a lot about it, it seems to me. So our ways to mitigate it are lacking. And we often look at things like the temperature outcomes, but we mostly talk about like the mean values. But given like the current trajectories, we might still end up like with 3 and more degrees of warming. And this could potentially be devastating for our global society. And so there might be that we are already in kind of collapse. We can also point to things like the democratic erosion. But like generally, everybody who talks about this with certainty, I would be like very cautious, because the way I usually see it is that our society gets better and worse at the same time. Like there are many problems we are not taking care of enough. But on the other side, we are making like progress in sciences, understanding how societies work, what we even have to do to prepare for large catastrophes, how we might manage them. At least to me, it seems like the bets are very much still off. And the interesting thing, like for the next decades, will be to find out if the forces that are stabilizing society will turn out to be stronger, or if the forces that destabilize society will turn out to be stronger.
All right, so we're the most you can say right now. We're kind of in this weird muddled state where it's like, and I guess in the future we'll kind of make things clear. And because this, and when I was asking about like this current moment, it also reminded me of I think it's in some of the novels by William Gibson, the science fiction writer. He talks about this idea of the jackpot, where it's basically this kind of like slow, long burning, like 100-year long, basically societal collapse, where it's like a whole bunch of things go wrong in kind of like using jackpot as kind of like this like dark humor of like, oh yeah, every we rolled a 7 every single time, but in this case the 7 was for everything terrible. And then, but like if you were living during it, you might not even realize because everything just kind of like added up in some sort of slow cumulative way. And it sounds like we're not there, because there are also obviously some good trends and things like that. But yeah, it's just because I think, right, when people think about collapse, it often takes the form in many people's minds of like nuclear war or something like that, where it's just like everyone is basically like civilization is totally destroyed and it happens very, very rapidly. But it sounds like there's many, many ways in which collapse can happen. And sometimes it can be very slow and it can be a very person by person mixture of experiences. And sometimes it might even be hard to even know if you're in it.
Yeah, totally. There's definitely like many futures still open. Like maybe we are one of the luckiest civilizations who even like was able to survive like a long, long time because we just got lucky, even though we didn't like have a good organization when it comes to resilience. But like in general, like I would try to push more also for a narrative that we still have like lots of things we can do, because like it feels to me like in the last few years people got very doomy, which is kind of understandable because like a lot of things are not great. But I still think like there's still so much we can do, and especially like with research like we have here around societal collapse, like we know also more and more the things like we have to do to make our societies likely more resilient. And the great thing is like that it seems like being democratic and having relatively low inequality is good for your societal resilience. And it also is just like a nice thing in general. Like if we manage to become very democratic and have a very equal society, but no collapse even knocks on the door, like that's fine by me.
Right.
I
That would
can
not
live
be, yeah,
with that.
right. One could be quite happy with that. Yeah. Right. And I think exactly what you're saying is the right perspective, which is that you can be a little bit doom and gloom, but when that doom and gloom turns into like a sense of like lack of control and a lack of despair and just kind of like what is the future? It's just this thing that's like washing over me, versus saying, no, it is the accumulation of choices that we are all making
Yeah.
as humans. And so therefore we actually have the choice of like the kind of world we want to be living in. Do you spend any time talking to policymakers or other kinds of people who are in those positions to help figure out the kinds of choices we need to make?
I try.
Okay,
But,
that's
like
great.
it's tricky because like obviously like policymakers are often like very busy, and especially if you are a researcher who is working like on more of a fringe field, it's difficult to get their ear. But for example, like I recently started working with the team from Societal Dynamics, and their whole idea is like, okay, we know now from the work around structural demographic theory what things probably like increase societal resilience and well-being of people. So let's try to bring this message to the people, but also like to the people who make the decisions. Because ultimately, if we just produce science and nobody takes it up, it doesn't really like happen, and nothing happens. I like this very analogy I've heard some time ago, which I don't remember where from, but that for many people like who treat science, it's like that you're producing like your nice little gems of knowledge, and at the edge of science, like there's a fence, and then you just take your diamond of knowledge and you throw it over the fence so somebody on the other side can take it up and save the world with it. But the problem is like there's nobody on the other side of the fence.
Okay.
So you have to go there yourself with your little knowledge diamond and bring it into the world, because otherwise like nobody will care.
Yeah, are there a lot of people trying to bring their knowledge diamonds in this space to to the rest of the world, or do you feel like by and large it's still a very small number of people?
It's very small, and unfortunately over the last few years it also seems to have gotten smaller, because the problem is that there is like very little funding in this whole field of research, like both societal collapse but also like especially global catastrophic risk, because both fields are in this kind of weird limbo space that they are like relatively established, but not like so established that you would like get easily money from like traditional academic funding channels. They're often like reviewer 2 hates global
Yeah.
catastrophic risk, like
Okay.
doesn't like it at all. And on the other side, like you had philanthropic funders who've been funding a lot of this work, especially around global catastrophic risk, but they have now mostly decided that AI is the only thing that matters. And good old nuclear war research that doesn't get any money anymore. And so you have this problem with these both research fields, that you are like too weird and unusual like for normal academic funding and too boring for philanthropic funding often. And so there are many, many ideas and very motivated people in the field, but not that much money to go around.
That's yeah, It's a really rough situation where I'd like to be stuck in that kind of like in between space. Is there also something there where going back to like this like loss of sense of control or agency that some people are just more interested in funding research and work about how to recover after things go wrong? Because I feel like I know you've done some work around like food security and certain things of like implications of like post-nuclear war, or how to think about that. Are some people just doing research or more willing to fund research for like how to deal with the situations after things go wrong versus kind of trying to understand how we get to the point where things go wrong?
Yeah, that's even less money.
Really? Okay. So it's not like, oh, right. Okay. Okay.
The one main organization who works on these kind of things is like the Alliance to Free Terrorist and Disasters, ALFAT, which I've been working with in the past. And they are also like struggling for funding. And especially like for their work, I find it like especially sad that they don't get more money, because every time I talk to somebody and explain them like what ALFAT does, for example, and this idea like, hey, if a supervolcano erupts, there's not much we can do about it. So it would be nice if we have a plan B. And everybody says, that totally makes sense.
And then they just move on.
Then they move on. And this is kind of the problem, is that these things make totally sense to everyone, because like not having food is just bad, obviously, but it doesn't really translate in getting the resources to actually do a lot of more of the research. So we as a society would actually be prepared for these things.
So I wonder if as we're kind of finishing up, are there any, I mean, it's weird to say, are there any points of optimism in the field of societal collapse? But like, and especially in terms of like how society grapples with this. Like, are there points of optimism of like, oh yeah, you see certain aspects of society that are really that do take these kinds of things seriously, or maybe certain governments that notice this. Like, are there points of hope that we can think about, even when thinking about societal collapse?
Yeah, I think there are, even though it is still not a totally mainstream topic to talk, for example, about global catastrophic risk. They are taken up more. And you can especially see this in things like national risk registers, where countries map out all the bad things that could happen to their country. These have gotten much better in the last years. Like, especially like the UK is pretty good, and Switzerland, they think about like all kinds of things and all kinds of big catastrophes. And this often stays still at a somewhat abstract level, and I'm not sure like how much they actually prepare, but it's great that they even start thinking about it. Because if you would have gone to like any official globally before, I don't know, 20 years or so, and asked them like, what does your country think about like the food situation after a very large volcanic eruption, probably nobody would have given you an answer. And now you at least have the chance to find somebody who might have an answer. And the other thing is that gives me hope is I really like the idea of citizen assemblies, that you take together like a large group of people that are roughly representative of society and let them deliberate around like difficult topics that your society has to grapple with. And these tend to create like very balanced, forward-looking suggestions of what societies might do to be better prepared for all kinds of topics. And while these are often not like taken up by actual politicians, at least it's getting more. Like, there are very nice databases where you can see like that the amount of citizen assemblies that are done, that is increasing. And in the way they are increasing, I would think that also like their impact increases and their influence increases. And if we could do in the future like more of these processes to figure out what we can do to tricky situations that our societies change, then we are at least going in the right direction for this.
Okay. Well, I will take those bits of hope. Those are hopeful notes enough. No, that makes me feel a little bit better. Yeah, anyway, this is a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. It was very nice to talk to you.